My name's Dave Schumacher, and I'm the Science and Technology Advisor for the Southern Wisconsin Paranormal Research Group. And what I'd like to do is talk to you about some of the equipment we use when we are doing investigations or research with the group. So, first of all, I'm going to point out that I am not the EVP specialist, Cindy Heinen is, but she has very gladly left some of her equipment here for us to show you. She uses some very high-end digital recorders, and she'll also run another recorder as well, a backup recorder, an analog cassette recorder, and that way she's able to compare. If she gets something that sounds like a suspect EVP, we can compare it to see if it shows up on one recorder or two recorders, and she's also able to determine if it was just a natural sound in the environment that we may not have heard at the time of the recording. So there's her setup. And if we move over, the next part is some of the handheld equipment that we use. This piece of equipment here, this is a thermocouple or a very fancy thermometer. And it reads the temperature very quickly and very accurately. It reads ambient air temperature. And we like to use this because it gives you an idea of what the real temperature is. Because if you use one of the non-contact thermometers that a lot of people are using these days, it actually has to hit something to get a reading. And we're not really sure if what we're looking for, ghosts, apparitions, have any type of mass to them. So it's best to use this at least in conjunction with that to figure out what the real temperature is. The next piece of equipment is the air ion counter. And we've been using this for a couple years now. And there's a couple reasons. First of all, as a lot of the equipment we use, we're not sure what goes on or what changes in the environment when somebody has an experience. They hear something, see something, witness an apparition, have a weird feeling in a haunted location. So we like to collect as much data about the different environmental conditions as we can. And this is yet another piece of equipment that we will use. It's an air ion counter. It measures the concentration of positive and negative ions. And there's been some published research out there that shows that if there's an abundance of positive ions, people will have more negative feelings. If there's an abundance of negative ions, you have a more positive feeling. And this is one of the reasons why some of the ion generators, the ionic breezes, they'll pump out a lot of negative ions. So not only are they supposed to provide a cleansing of the environment, but they also provide a good feeling. Now, we've had a couple cases where we had a family tell us that it felt really negative, like a foreboding experience in the location. And when we went in, sure enough, there was an excessive amount of positive ions in the location. And we think that was probably a natural cause that was leading to them having those feelings. But there's also been cases where we were at a location in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin at the Park House haunting where I thought I experienced a cold chill, but there was no temperature change. What actually had happened is there was a tenfold increase in the ion counts during that time, and then when it stopped, I didn't have the cold chill, the feeling anymore. The ion counts went back to normal. So that's a pretty useful piece of equipment. And now we get into some of the more advanced pieces of equipment that we use with the group. And these two computers with the variety of sensors here, this is known as the DEAD system, or the Direct Environmental Acquisition Data Logging System. And what we like about that is it takes the data that it collects, electromagnetic fields, radiation, temperature, humidity, geomagnetic fields, random number generators. It'll take that information and save it and date timestamp it. So if somebody has an experience, or we get a piece of data in a photo or an electronic voice phenomena, or the temperature supposedly changed, or the electromagnetic field changed, we can go back and take that and correlate it with all the other environmental data that we were monitoring. And that way it gives us a really good feel of what's going on in the environment, which can tell us what is affected in the environment when there's paranormal activity, or what is happening in the environment that make us think that there might be some sort of paranormal activity. So it gets at the question of, what's natural and what might not be natural as well. Now, a little bit further explanation on some of this equipment. This computer here is running a quantum-based random number generator. It's basically like every second it's flipping 200 times a coin. And it's going to give you ones or zeros, or heads or tails, whatever way you want to think about it. And it seems that various studies in the parapsychological literature and some of the experiences we've had with it is that when there's a high degree of emotion in the environment, or there's something going on in the environment like poltergeist activity, or what we like to call recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, that the output of this device goes from randomness to non-randomness. And we're not quite sure why it happens yet, but it is something that we're taking a look at and using it in the field more and more. And some of the results we're getting are interesting. Again, the recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, we actually ran this in a location where a female was experiencing poltergeist activity, and at the time that something happened, you could see there was actually a buildup, and this little line started deviating significantly, being that it was outputting non-random data, and then there was a loud pounding on the wall, and that was the peak of the location on the data that it deviated from randomness, which was very interesting. So we continued to use that in our investigations to collect more information. If we move over to the next piece of equipment, the graph on the left-hand side of the screen, that's keeping track of the electromagnetic field, mainly the man-made 60 hertz field. We've seen that there's been fluctuations in that field in locations where people report various types of paranormal activity. There's also been some published literature where people have shown that changes in electromagnetic fields can affect your brain wave or your brain activity and have you perceive things that might seem paranormal. They actually did a study, Dr. Persinger up in Canada, where he put a helmet on people's heads and shot through it a bunch of different electromagnetic fields, frequencies, and different times. And these people reported things very similar to what people experience in haunted locations. Now, they were very vague, and they didn't seem to have any historical or contextual accuracy like you do in a haunted location. For example, you go to a place where nobody knows the history, nobody knows anybody else who's been there, and they all report the same type of activity, and it's historically and contextually accurate. So what we'd like to do is take what they've learned in the lab, go out in the field and investigate and see if we're getting changes in the electromagnetic field. And again, that date timestamps all the data, and we're able to take a look at it and see if it correlates with other experiences or other pieces of data. The next one, the graph on the right, that's measuring radiation levels. And the reason we're doing that is, again, with the environment, we're trying to measure as many things as we can to see what changes. Now, there was a case that the movie The Entity was based out of. It was investigated by a group of parapsychologists, psychologists from UCLA, and they found that when this woman reported activity in the house, the background radiation levels went from, there's a normal range, about 10 or so counts per minute, and when the woman reported activity, the radiation levels went from 10 down to 0. They just bottomed out and they dropped out. And we've had a couple cases where that's happened as well. It correlated with other experiences. For example, a case in Milwaukee where Cindy Heinen, our EVP specialist, said she felt a cold breeze or draft down the side of her arm and her neck. Well, we had one investigator take a couple photos, and the photo before and after the experience were fine, but the one during had a big black blob area that kind of blocked out part of her body and part of the background. The interesting thing was when you looked at the time period that happened, the background radiation levels went to 0. So there was absolutely no background radiation, which there should be, because there's always some sort of background radiation no matter where you are in the world. And then when the experience was over, it shot back up. The other thing that was really neat was that the electromagnetic fields, which we also had date time stamped, showed that there was a flip in the field. It went from the XY axis to basically left. Let me back up and say it went from really left to right to up and down. So it's like the field flipped, and then again when the experience was over, it flipped back. So taking all that information, we are able to get a picture, an experience, and also correlate it with changes in radiation and electromagnetic field. And overall, again, this gives us a really good idea of what's going on in the environment when people have experiences, which hopefully someday we'll be able to say, okay, if you have this experience, we expect this to happen in the environment, or if something naturally happens in the environment, this might be allowing you to have an experience. So in the long run, we're hoping to better understand paranormal activity, hauntings, ghosts, and poltergeist RSPK type cases.